I mean, if there was ever an episode where we get cancelled on, this might be it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a exciting episode of the Aarthi and Sriram show. This is the post-election, post-DOGE, new era, America 250. It's a whole new world episode of the Aarthi and Sriram show. Welcome.
Welcome. I'm really surprised you didn't pull in a WWE joke in there.
We have time. And so we are recording this about a week or so, actually, or a week and a half
Yeah.
after the election. And unless you were sleeping under a rock, it was obviously a pretty dramatic win for Donald Trump, who's now the president-elect. It's looking, as we record this, it's looking like, even the House is going to go the Republicans' way. So it's all three branches of government.
Yeah.
And so, what's the mood been? How are you feeling?
There are things that we say, generally, Sriram and I draw heat on. If you've seen our comments, Indian restaurants in London, there are these set of topics. I think U.S. elections is going to rank right up there. Look, for us, we've been American citizens for a while now. It's one of our privileges to be able to get in there, be a part of this whole system, and be able to vote. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, especially on the technology side of things, which is what we want to talk about today, we've seen a lot of changes, and unfortunately not many for good, with respect to how tech and tech policies have affected startups and technology companies. So for me, this election, I'm just cautiously optimistic based on what's been promised, who are all getting into this new age of government, and we're going to talk a lot more about it. I'm just excited. There's just new blood, new energy. Feels like there's new momentum, and it's hard to not get caught up in this whole sort of exuberance right now.
I'll give you one interesting take that people may not have heard elsewhere. I turned 41 this year, and I had a lot of people about my age message me, and this is people on, I would say, both sides of the political spectrum, looking at the vice president-elect, J.D. Vance,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that and others like Vivek, Ramaswamy, who are going to be involved, and going like, hey, I'm the same age, and now these are people our age doing things, which is one, I would say, just net good that we have young people, running the show or helping run the show. The second is, I think it's going to spark off a lot of what am I doing in life crisis all over Silicon Valley.
Family WhatsApp groups popping.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, you have the vice president-elect who is your age. What have you done in life?
Yes. The meme is somebody pointed out on Twitter, it used to be, or X used to be, you can just do things.
Yes.
And turns out you can just do things means becoming the vice president. Or in Vivek's case, topic we're going to talk about is running the Department of Government Efficiency, or better known as
DOGE.
Okay. First of
We live in the meme world.
Yes. First of all, how crazy is it that you go back all this while to a meme coin going all the way to a government agency? But we got a lot to talk about DOGE. So for those of you who may not have followed, President-elect Trump announced that Elon Musk and Vivek are going to head up this new, I think it's an agency. I'm not sure what the official term is, but I think I'll just call it an agency.
Yeah.
Called Department of Government Efficiency. And this is something where I would say the focus is figure out how and where to reduce costs in federal government, go after waste, go after bureaucracy, go after unnecessary expenditure, and cut it all out. And I think there's a deadline of sometime in 2026, I believe.
Yeah.
And so you have Elon and Vivek off to the races.
Is one way to look at it, founder mode meets U.S. government?
Absolutely. Or as somebody said, founding father mode.
Founding father.
Which is not a line I can take credit for, but you know who you are.
Yeah, I want to say a couple things, right? One, we've had Elon Musk in our OG version of this show. We've had Vivek more recently on our show. So we've had a bunch of these people as guests on our podcast. And a lot of our sort of people, the network of technology folks, Silicon Valley people, are all connected to Doge in some way, or in the new government side of things in some way. But you have seen this firsthand at Twitter, right? So what are sort of like parallels there from what Elon had done with Twitter to what you're seeing now or what you're hearing about with Doge?
It's a good question. I think there's something a lot of people have been asking me about. First, I think this effort is hugely important. I think it was referred to as the Manhattan Project of our time,
Yeah.
and I don't think it undersells the significance of that, because regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, it is very, very clear that we have red tape and bureaucracy that has just gotten a lot and way too much, and we need to get rid of a lot of it. Now, I haven't really spoken to Elon much about this, just a little bit, but I do think that looking at how we operated in Twitter and X, you can draw some parallels.
Yeah.
And of course, Vivek has also been talking about reducing the bureaucracy and the deep state, as he would call it, all through his presidential campaign and afterwards. So Elon operates in a very, very simple way, where he basically says, what do the laws of physics mandate? And if the laws of physics don't mandate it, then let's question everything. And so one example could be, and I think there's all these examples from his time at SpaceX, even before Twitter, where people would go, okay, this part, this vendor or somebody is charging us, say, $100
Yeah.
to go make it. And he would go say, okay, well, what does this part actually cost if you just made it by hand or made it in a machine? And say, well, $10. But okay, why is it not $10? Because there is no law of physics which forbids it from being $10. And you would start there. And I saw this play out over and over again at X, where I remember the first day.
This is a let that sink in day.
Yeah, the let it sink day. We'd come in, and I think there was a question. He posed a question of why can't we have podcast videos on X?
Yeah.
And at the time, I think the old Twitter could only have 10-minute uploads, and obviously every podcast video was much, much longer than that. And somebody, I remember nobody knew the answer. And first he emphasized that speed was the essence. So, and the way he did that was, I remember saying, like, let's just get the right person on the phone. So we call up this engineer on this conference room phone, put him on speaker, and it was something like, well, I don't know the answer, but this other person may know the answer. Again, in old organizations, this would mean a week of slide decks, scheduling.
Review.
He was like, let's get the other person on the phone. And so we went down this phone tree from the speaker phone in the conference room and be like, hey, Elon, you're on speaker. Elon Musk is here. And ultimately, it turned into, like a lot of people would expect, some combination of, it was a cost-cutting exercise, there was a technical decision made, is usually something in the middle, right? But it was not obviously forbidden by the laws of physics. It is obviously possible for 60-minute plus videos to be uploaded to a social media platform in 2024. And so then he was able to say, okay, well, let's just work through the steps of how to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I saw this happen over and over again. The other thing I saw him do is focus on zero-based budgeting, right? Which is, a lot of times when you think about your budgets and resources, what a lot of people would do is they would start from, okay, my budget for this year was X million dollars. I have so many people. And next year, usually in a corporate environment, you go pitch for an increase, right? You go say,
whatever.
I need more headcount, I need more money.
Yeah.
And what Elon and his team did at X was to say, okay, we're going to start everyone off at zero.
Yeah.
And you are going to have to justify every single dollar, headcount, resources, vendors, whatever they may be, that you need.
Right.
And that justification has to be mapped to the impact on the priorities of Twitter. That could mean keeping the site up. That could mean making money for the company. That could mean some core product experience. It didn't matter. But you have to justify why you need that money. And it did not matter if you had hundreds of people. It would come down to zero. So, for example, if you look at some of the cost cutting that happened, some of the most cuts happen in large parts of the marketing organization, because Elon had the view like, hey, we don't need a lot of those folks. We don't need a lot of the money we're spending there. We don't need to throw these really, really fancy events because we have other ways of doing it, and he exists. And I think history would prove that he was probably right about that. So that was a place where he basically said, let's start from zero and justify every single thing. So how does this map into Doge? So I would say, look, obviously, who knows how this all plays out? It's all very, very new. But I would suspect that this is going to translate into, one, Elon, Vivek, and some bunch of people who are probably going to be on some of the most interesting, important experience of their lifetimes.
Right.
They're going to go through, for various parts of the federal government, what are you spending money on? And more importantly, why? Which is, if you're spending X dollars on this, why people working on this? What is the impact they are having?
Yeah.
How are you measuring that impact? And let's start everybody at zero and work up from there.
Does that So I only say this because I don't really know what different departments of the government, how do they function, what the day to day looks like. I've never held jobs in these roles. Um, Tech companies, I can sort of see it work, right? Like everything that you build, like we worked in tech for about 20 years now. I can sort of see how that applies. First principles, you start from zero, get it. Does that work for government?
I think we're going to find out. I do think, but I think in some ways it's a lot easier for government, where I would say that question you posed actually hints at some of the problems we have, which is by definition, we should know what these folks in the government are doing.
Right.
Because in some ways, we're paying for it. Actually,
Right.
not some ways, we are
Paying for it.
And so, and I think one very positive outcome of this, regardless of what happens, is we're going to get a lot of transparency on how money is being spent. And I think Elon posted about this the other day, where he said we're going to have a open leaderboard and transparency on every single thing that is being done.
Yeah.
So I can totally imagine, think of it like a Google spreadsheet open to everybody, going down line item by line item of, say, this department of X, department of Y, how many people, what are they working on, what is the impact they're having, and we're going to start there. So I think there's going to be a lot of transparency. This sunlight is the best disinfectant, as people say, and I think in other ways, look, it's no secret that one of the big thrusts for this new government is going to be, we're spending too much, we have too many people in the government, we have too much bureaucratic red tape, let's cut it down. So I do think we're going to see a real push on what is the real impact these folks are having. And in a lot of places, less people, less red tape might just mean you're unlocking innovation, you're unlocking good things for America.
Man, okay, amazing. The pitch is pretty cool. I mean, I want to see how this all works out. It's been a week, and we are starting to see what different people are going to do, different roles. So I'm optimistic. We'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, I think Tyler Cohen today, nobody knows the real details, obviously, and I suspect it's all very early. But I do think a lot of people have very good ideas. And for example, Tyler Cohen had a good piece today in Bloomberg where he spoke about, okay, one way to do it is, first off is, as doctors would say, first do no harm. So first is like, let's just stop regulations for totally new sectors, right? Like, for example, let's stop regulations for, say, AI or other places. So one is, as much as you're cutting out red tape, let's, whatever the metaphor is, let's stop peeling off tape and sticking in new places. That's number one.
Right.
Number two is, I do think there are so many examples where when it comes to the technology ecosystem, the business ecosystem of where things have been just really, really broken. And of course, I'm very, very close to the crypto ecosystem, the AI ecosystem.
Right.
But, you had Elon talking about how it takes more time to push papers from one government to the other than for him to build a rocket. So those are places where you can be like, okay, what can we remove so that you unlock innovation in America to be competitive? But look, I think it's going to be a fantastic, interesting exercise, and it is going to definitely play out very much in public, which is going to be fun.
It's amazing. I mean, I am very excited to see how it all plays out. It's still early days, so once like post swearing in and everything, we're going to go see what happens. And it'll probably come.
What is the government department you want to eliminate?
I don't know. I mean,
you had a few runs the DMV.
I mean,
I might be asked to edit that out later.
Yeah, probably. I want to sort of take a step back, right? Take a step back even before DOGE and everything else. Leading up to the elections, do you think Elon had a role to play in getting Trump elected?
Absolutely. I think, I would say...
I'm guessing yes, but in what way? I mean, we saw it just from being sort of these like users of Twitter/X and sort of seeing how much he was posting about Pennsylvania and everything else. But how much of a role did you think he played in getting Trump elected?
I think I think a pretty big one, because the way I think he did two things. One is he spent a significant amount of money
Yeah.
on the election.
Yeah.
But second, maybe more important, is he essentially set up camp in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
He did all of these rallies and events, and he is just one of the most famous people, if not the most famous person in the world, and he was just able to draw so much attention in the last few weeks of the campaign. So I think both sides, and I've talked to a lot of Democratic friends, both agree that Elon had a big part to play. But one interesting topic, which I think when historians look back upon this election, or either when the Democratic Party trying to reboot will think about, is the Democrats, I think, picked two opponents that they absolutely didn't need to, right? Like
opponents in the sense of like picked enemies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Where you would think that, and I think one is the crypto industry,
Yeah.
and two is Elon. And both are very interesting because both have been historically neutral or aligned with the Dems, right? If you think about crypto, crypto is egalitarian at its heart.
Yeah.
It is about power to the people. It is about
Yeah.
removing inequality, all of those things. This should be so naturally aligned
with
to
breadth,
the
yeah.
ethos of the Dems. But for a lot of reasons, and if you folks haven't followed this, I suggest watching Mark and Ben's podcast on this.
Yep.
The Biden administration got totally on the other side of crypto.
Yeah.
That has been well discussed. I think Elon is even more interesting because there is these all these. If you think about it, he made electric vehicles happen in the U.S.
Yeah.
He made a lot of battery technology happen. There is this historical photo of President Obama visiting him. He's one of the great American entrepreneurs. He should have been celebrated by the left, but for a bunch of reasons, again, which will be debated, he wound up being made a villain of. And President Biden didn't invite him to the EV summit.
Yes.
And
It's sort of ridiculous. Like, you have one of the most popular EV brands out there, and you don't invite the CEO.
Yes, and I think if you look at the video from that, President Biden basically points at, I think it was the GM CEO, and says, "You led." And I think at the time they shipped like 5 cars or something.
Yeah.
And so all of these it led to Elon just being on the other side. So I think one way there'll be so many hot takes coming out of this election, and if you haven't seen those hot takes, trust me, go check out any political podcast or open up X. But I think one of the interesting themes is the Dems picking up opponents who would be natural allies, they made into opponents.
Yeah, and it goes a little beyond that too. And from our standpoint, when we think about big companies and small startups, our jobs, what we do entirely is about like working with founders, working with entrepreneurs, working with builders. And then that entire tech stack had different problems thanks to, the last 4 or 5 years of governance, right? Whether you think about M&As and tech regulations, and how it just like regulations sort of got in the way of people building companies, people being able to sell companies, IPO markets, all of it. Like everything got sort of like constrained and chokeholded. That was one. And we can talk about like various examples in tech with like crypto and AI regulations and all of these things. Then you look at like just day to day American cities. We lived in San Francisco for a very, very long time. Just got really near borderline unlivable. Just rampant crime, rampant theft, and just like what used to be like really amazing American cities just got to this point where just crime was through the roof and nothing was ever happening. Nobody, like the Democratic government wasn't really doing anything about it, but they weren't even like acknowledging what was going on the ground. And I think a lot of people like you and me, like these big allies of the Dems, this is sort of like when you think about immigration, and it's a topic we should talk about. We all came to the country, and Democrats were like natural allies for bringing in immigrants and skilled immigration. And it got to this point where it just alienated a lot of us with respect to cities that we lived in, conditions that we are in, work that we do, companies that we invest in, and all of these. And I think the support surface area for the Dems got smaller and smaller and smaller. And this is totally sort of like something that they just brought on themselves.
There was this great podcast today, a couple of days ago, from I would say, as two people who are as much in the heart of the democratic thoughtosphere as possible. Ezra Klein on Pod Save America, right? Like, you can't get more democratic left on than both them. But Ezra basically said, if you lived in the big city, it would be impossible for you to not sense the anger from people about the Democratic administration. And a lot of the big cities are obviously run by Democratic authorities, San Francisco, New York, etc. And there was a lot of anger around crime. San Francisco, much discussed. New York also on immigration. And so there was this discordance between the anger people felt in places which were historically extremely left-leaning and the experience they're having in the cities, and also, to your point, how it was not acknowledged in the narrative. So, and I think this is a broader view on tech also, where the tech industry were natural allies of the left. If you go back to the 2012 campaign or the 2008 campaign, the whole narrative was President Obama won with the tech industry, right? He won because of social media. That was the whole thing.
And I think part of the reason why Kamala Harris lost was there is no reason for her to, like, there's no way she could be in and be like, we're going to fix this. I mean, like, you were the vice president. Why couldn't you fix it this whole time that you were here in the office?
Yeah. So looking forward, I guess one question is going to be, what do the Dems do to win back some of these constituencies where they've just made enemies of it? Like, for example, the tech industry is a great one, right? The tech industry, historically always Dem. Even now, I think if you look at the stats, most tech employees, maybe set aside the people you see on X, often still vote for Democrat, but obviously the tone has massively shifted. And I think, as the Democratic Party and the left goes through a little bit of a part is probably going to be a reboot. We're going to be good to figure out, like, how do you get back the tech industry? How do you get back people to basically go, look, these people don't hate us, right? Like, because there's a whole sense that these folks just hate us.
Exactly. And also, I think the first step is to just acknowledge the anger. Like, there's a reason we are angry. For us, it just got to this point where walking down the street in San Francisco got super crazy and dangerous. When was the time we thought that was ever going to happen? And I think part of it was like just this feeling of constantly feeling gaslit, where nobody was acknowledging what we were going through and feeling like everything's fine. You should just be grateful to, be here. And that's not okay. Like, I think the first step is to just acknowledge the anger that people are feeling in these cities on what's happened to them.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll see. Maybe they have a bit of time and to figure out what to say.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, you talked about Elon and his role in the election. This is also the tech and podcast election, right? Very famously, I think Trump went on Joe Rogan. This is the first time you're sort of seeing this, like, podcast being used as this big tool to be able to reach the voter base, the audience. What do you think of that?
I think this is the ultimate culmination of the online world being more important than the offline world. Because the historical narrative, every election would be that what really matters is your ground game. What really matters is you going out, knocking on voters' doors, the whole thing, right? But it turns out what really matters is you reaching people in places where they are paying attention to. And I think podcasts get mentioned, but I would think everything online, right? X was a lot of political conversation was happening on X. And I think you're right. Like, the Trump side, and I think his son Barron, if you read the reports, had a big part to play in it, right? They picked all of these streamers and podcasters. Like, he went on Aiden Russ. He did something with the Nelk Boys. He did something with Theo One. He did something with Rogan. He did something with so many of these people, where these were just folks who were just so plugged in to what young people, especially young men, like to watch. And now, a lot of people might be listening to this, and I follow this space very, very closely. People who listen to this and they go, okay, this is where the online right hangs out. And that is not true, right? Like, this is, if you look at somebody like a Theo One, He's a comedian, right? He's funny, he's irreverent, right? He's an acquired taste, but he's funny, right? Rogan was extremely liberal, supported Bernie Sanders in the last election. And a lot of these folks are just kind of very neutral when it comes to political topics, right? But they're a bit edgy, and they do have an overwhelming male audience. So I do think, first of all, I forget the name of this person, but Trump had a podcast strategy person, but I think Barron was in definitely had a role. Picked all these great leading podcasts to play, right? That is number one. I think, on the other hand, with the current vice president Kamala's campaign, they did do a little. I think they went on Call Her Daddy, right? But I do think it was too little and not enough to reach the audience she wanted to. So she didn't go on Rogan, famously. She didn't go on a lot of these other places. And the stories coming out now seem to point that they were afraid of a backlash of going on Rogan. But look, that's what happens. You go there, you speak for 3 hours, and you basically, I mean, you speak for 3 hours, it's very difficult to hide behind talking points. So people get a real sense of who you are. So, for example, I know a lot of my friends who are Democrats listen to the JD Vance podcast on Joe Rogan and saying like, oh, this is a reasonable guy. Right?
It's like same with the Jared Kushner one with Lex Friedman. Right? I think that was sort of like one of the turning points that people looked at that and go, okay, like, this guy has like, really understands foreign policy, really understands what's going on here. So I think that was sort of like the first time people took him seriously.
The Kushner one is very interesting because before then, if you just listen to the media coverage of it, right? Like, it always kind of portrayed him as somebody who didn't understand the details, who's out of his depth. But if you listen to that podcast, right, like within just a few minutes, regardless of your take, you'll be like, oh, this guy really knows his stuff, right? And he's very plugged in, very details. He's obviously very smart. It is indisputable. It's like watching LeBron James play. Now, you might disagree with him, but he's very plugged in and involved in the details. And so I think that podcast immediately switched a lot of people's opinions on him. And I do think there's a lesson here on two sides. One is to find the natural medium for what you're going to do. So, for example, finding a friendly host, finding a person who's just going to have a long form conversation with you, than just, I don't know, interrupt you every other sentence. The second part of it is, I do think for especially the Dems, there's this big question about, okay, who's our audience? And I don't know whether they have good answers, right? Like, who is the Rogan used to be the Rogan on the left, but if there is no more Rogan on the left, who is the Rogan on the left? I don't know.
What do you think happens in with mainstream media? You talked about Wired recently, made this like post on Twitter. What do you think happens there?
Well, the bull optimistic case is that there is a period of reckoning and introspection, and they realize that they have gotten overtly political.
So similar reset.
And has a reset. I think the base case is that nothing happens and they just go back to the race. Like, Wired is a very good example. So the post she's referring to, we should try and link to it, is my take that people, Wired or magazines like Scientific American or
we love those. Growing,
we love those.
We just love these things. These
are hugely impactful. That they did not need to have politics, right? And if you look at Wired, I'll give you just a few examples. And it is crazy because if you look at it, if you go to the search box on Wired.com right now, and I don't think this will change by the time this video comes out, the default text which they suggest to you is racial justice. And so I have many cards there. The first of all is that Wired should not be, Wired is not the place where, you go for racial justice. Like, nothing wrong covering racial justice. Wired is not the natural place for that, right? Number two is, it's just kind of weird to go to Wired and somebody there has made a decision saying like, this is the search query we are going to suggest to you as as a shining example, like, this is the best of us. And you're like, why?
I mean, whoever's a growth person there needs to be fired, because if I was running growth for Wired, that's not the search term I would put there. Like, you're just like shooting yourself in the foot. I don't like, this might be a hot take, but not all companies need to get into social justice all the time. Like, this is not the job of these companies, including like, I talk about this to like lots of early stage, mid stage startups too. Like, you have a job to do, you need to grow your products. Like, you don't have to be like, irresponsible for what's happening around you, but not getting into social justice is not the thing that you're getting paid to do or what you're like getting hired to do.
Yeah. One of the interesting things happened after my Wired post is that so many people currently at Wired, formerly at Wired, reached out saying it's amazing, right? And I don't want to say who they are, but there's like more than like a handful of people saying, one, they agree. Apparently, my post went viral in this sort of ex-Wired employee group.
Yeah.
The second is that everyone is just scared of the current employee base, right? And there is this whole discussion of everybody knows this. Everyone is a bit scared of the current grouped employees there, and nobody knows how to switch it.
Emperor's new clothes.
Yeah, and so it is funny because there were multiple people. Trust me, this was multiple people who work at Wired right now saying that we agree with you. We don't know what to do. And I'll give you another example of Wired. Right, I would say, regardless of your political views, one of the most amazing engineering accomplishment of the year was when Starbase law was caught by the chopstick.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Indisputably, one of the most interesting things that happened. Right.
Yeah.
Wire.com, which covers every single thing, right? A lot on racial justice, obviously, has zero mentions of that incident. Zero mentions, right? And so, and it's so funny because a lot of people are trying to prove me wrong on X and they're trying to find one. Nobody could find the piece on this. So that is like, okay, so it is not, my issue is not so much you're covering all this social stuff, which is problem itself, but it's also you are missing your actual job, which is to cover science and technology and human accomplishment when it comes to the engineering. Like, if you're not covering that, like, what are you doing?
It's just also outside of all the what's happened here. It's really sad for me personally because I looked at Wired as like one of the reasons I wanted to like really go deep into tech and computer science. You would see these articles about people building things, what was going on, read stuff. And I think about like sort of the next generation of people. And you can't now have these things. Like for us, finding a Wired copy in the library or in like somebody else's office and just grabbing that and being able to like peruse through it, it gave me so much joy because you could see what other people were building and creating.
Yeah.
And now what you get to see is like how somebody was wrong because of their race or some social justice thing. And it's really sad. Like it's what a fall from grace there.
Yeah. So I think there are two schools of thought on this. One is what I think ours, and so I think ours is a romantic view, which is, oh my gosh, we grew up with these things, they're amazing institutions, and they need to be recovered. Like that is my thing. But a lot of people responded, and Nawal, Ravikant, Elon, others was like, Nawal said, the parasite has eaten the host, which is they're just dead and you need to move on. And maybe the new generation of journalists are people like MKBHD and Pirate Wires, and that is where you need to go. Wired is just dead, just move on, and not be nostalgic about it. No, I reject that, and that just, I think, the romantic in me, but they might have a point.
I think they have a point. I think it's very hard to course correct from where they are. As much as, you keep saying, look deep inside and reset and all of that is very, very hard to do. Like, if you've ever seen a company, even like a tech company that's done a turnarounds are really hard to do. So if you don't have somebody inside who's truly championing the cause, I think these are pretty much, you just give up on these and move on.
Yeah. I would say if somebody's watching from Wired, I would say the first thing you should know is, I'm not saying this, a lot of your own peers and team members are saying this. I just look at the comments on my post, right? You're going to see a lot of people who just grew up loving this and are deeply unhappy with the magazine right now. And by the way, I'm a print subscriber for 15 years. I'm a customer. I've been a paying customer. So I'm not a random person. I'm like literally, giving you money every month. I should probably cancel. I can't really figure out how. And Condé makes it very hard. And so I'm giving you customer feedback. But anyway.
Sort of facing a little bit forward, right? There are a few things that we care about a lot. The main thing I would say, and I was like hawkishly looking at, from Dems and Republicans, what do they think of? Skilled immigration. We've had Vivek on this podcast talk about it. We've done exclusive episodes just covering skilled immigration. It's a topic that's very close to us. We care a lot about it. We talk to a lot of founders about this. We do some work behind the scenes too to help people. EB1 applications, things like that. What do you think happens here? What would you like to see? And what do you think happens going forward?
So I have a little bit of an update, I would say, in my thinking from previous years and times we have covered this. And the first is that I've spent a lot of time talking to people on the Dems and the Republicans. And I think skilled immigration, and a lot of it is driven by the Indian community, was kind of really stuck with both places for a lot of reasons. On the Dem side, it was really stuck because the Democrats historically have wanted to combine it with illegal immigration reform, because they felt that skilled immigration was easier, illegal immigration was a bit harder, and so they wanted to combine it, and they blocked any attempt to get things through. The second, on the Republicans, if you look at the current state of the Republican Party, there are actually multiple schools of thought. There's one school of thought which Vivek would call the national protectionist school of thought, which would basically say that we as Americans need to preserve American jobs. And we need to make sure that we are protecting and giving opportunities to our citizens first before you bring anybody else.
Yeah.
Now, Vivek has a slightly different point of view, which if I were going to sum up, and obviously people should listen to him, he's very eloquent about it, is he calls it the national libertarian view, which is that he thinks that, one, obviously we should remove people who are in the country illegally. He wants to have citizenship be something that you have to acquire after passing and proving that you have the skills. But his view is that America should seek out the best. Now, a lot of people who've been following this debate in the tech world might go like, I think I know what that means. But exactly, he's saying something different, where he's saying it's not just the best in terms of this person has a PhD, this person has a skill, but he also says that we should be seeking out people who demonstrate the civic character, the adherence to morality, to American values, because they will help uplift American society. And he thinks they will, they will actually be a positive contribution to society, not just because you are amazing at your job, but there are all these other things that you're winding up doing. And his take is that that is the bar, those are the skills that every person who wants to get citizenship, including somebody who's born here, should put it. It's a different school of thought. So,
but how do you quantify morality?
Well, there's a whole thing there. But I think the point is like, so if you look at all of these folks, right, it is slightly askew of where the skilled immigration is.
Yeah.
I think the other part, which I would say controversially, is I think the current push on skilled immigration from, I would say, the Indian tech community is completely broken. Because like, if I'm just being blunt, for folks watching this, right, I have been involved in the immigration conversation for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
As participants, we went through our own visa process and green card process, and then, and after that, trying to get back into this. And it has been the same conversation for 20 plus years, right? Well, priority dates, country caps.
Yeah.
When I talk to people, they would say, well, we can't really go after the big guns, we want to maybe remove, get this little thing removed here because nobody wants to touch the country caps, right? That's number one. I would say the second thing is I think I would say the Indian community or the skilled immigrant community have historically been appealing to this idea of this just sucks as an experience, right? And there are these terrible stories about people whose spouses can't work, people who spent their entire time working here. We've had on people on our show, we had peers, etc. But here's the thing. This argument is not landing, right?
Yeah,
like, people, this is not landing. It is not working. It has been 15 years and it is just not working. And it's a reality. So my thinking has evolved a bit. And I'm not sure what the final evolution is, but I think number one is, if you're going to push for skilled immigration, right, you need to go after the final boss, the real villain, which is country caps, right? Like, you can't just talk about, hey, we want to remove this thing here, let somebody work for this. No. The ultimate question is, if you think we are adding value to this country, right, why does it matter where you were born? Right? Like, and then every question which flows out from that, everything from people gaming the system to, like, those are questions that need to be worked through.
Second order effects.
Yes, but that is going back to Elon, the fundamental principle, which is, you want to.
Why do you even want to have country caps?
So I think that is a final boss. That is a question to go after. Now, everything which comes out of that.
But the problem with that is, it's just really hard, right? Like, you seem to criticize a lot of the work, that's being done on the Indian side. A lot of our friends are involved in this thing. Country caps and removing country caps is sort of this like has a snowball effect. It leads to all of these things that US. If you think about government as an institution, like limited resources, that is not the can of worms that they want to go open, because country caps does not affect just India and Indian immigration. It also affects like different markets. What do they all do? Second order effects, China. You look at
Well,
all
I
of
think
these
India is the
things.
only market which really matters, right? Like, but the challenge is, it's very hard to build up the political will. But look, we have one party running all three branches of government,
Yeah.
and so if not now, when?
When?
Then I think so. Then the question becomes, okay, what is an argument that resonates? And I don't have an answer for that. But I don't think it is that the lives of the lives of the immigrants are very hard. So, and I'm going to give you maybe two directions, which I think are going to be interesting. The first one is that national security, I think, is a very interesting argument, which is if you believe that America needs to stay ahead of China, stay ahead competitively from the East in many, many ways, we need the best and the brightest, right? And I think it would be indisputable. I had a friend who was recently attending a meeting of the Meta machine learning or AI leadership team. And he texted me and he said, like, I looked around and almost all of them are Indian or Indian origin, right? And so
In the Meta team.
in the Meta,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so if you want the best and brightest in AI, right, like, let's get them over. So that's, I think, going to be question one, which is, it is a question of national security that we get the best and brightest.
Yeah.
The second controversial take I would offer is that if the country doesn't want you, right, go to somebody else who does. And what I mean by that is that if we think that these folks are the best and brightest, I think, which we think they are, right? Like, I do think if you're watching this, and I know some folks from other governments watch this, if you are in the UK, if you're in Canada, right, like if you're
But they've done that. Canada has like opened up its doors
Yeah.
for founders, tech folks to show up, and
yes.
that's happened before. So it's not new.
Well, I would think those governments can do a lot more. And I do think there's a question of, okay, if you're the best and brightest, right, go somewhere else where it's going to be a lot easier for you, right? Like, think of yourself as a product, right?
Yeah.
Your product is your talent, your intellect, your expertise, right? There are buyers for your product. The US is one buyer. Other countries are other buyers, right? And I do think some of these countries, I think the UK is one, Canada is one, where their product's actually very, very interesting, right? Like, and there are thriving tech ecosystems, there are thriving companies out there. Go out there, right? And I think, like, that you might find that you have way more professional success and personal success over there, right?
Yeah, honestly, if you're born in India, I want to do tech startup, stay in India.
That is another option
going on,
too, right? So
Yes.
think of it as a global talent marketplace where your product is you, your brains, right? Yeah, and your intellectual horsepower.
Basically, treat yourself as a distinguished product as opposed to doing what everybody else's conventional wisdom is doing. It's like, find a way to get a green card and come to the US, because if that journey is going to be super hard for X number of years, instead of taking on like random roles and spending 15, 17 years waiting for a green card, find other alternative options. Treat yourself as a product.
Yes. So I think there are multiple things here. The first thing, just kind of recap a little bit, is that the only thing which matters is the country caps, right? Like, that is the original sin, the fundamental crime, and there is no intellectual, honest conversation to be had when you're talking about the country caps. Second is that we now have a unique opportunity because one party runs the whole show.
Yeah.
Okay, but you need to find an argument that works for them. And I think, if I'm being honest, the argument of the last 14, 15 years is just not working. And we need to find new ones. We need to get new energy, right? We need to, and I do think things like national security, like, for example, Aravind Srinivas of Perplexity tweeted about green cards. How do we get more people like Aravind out here, right? Like, we want more people like Aravind in the US, right? So because it is a question of competitiveness. You don't want China to get Aravind. And so I think national security, I think there'll be other arguments. And the final part is, I think there's an opportunity for other countries to do a lot more, because if this intellectual horsepower, right, is finding it so hard in the US, great, get make your pitch to Aravind, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
It's a capitalistic market, so find the best way to like acquire the best talent if you were a government,
Yeah.
of like a non-US government.
Yeah, go out, see Aravind, roll out a pitch deck, talk about, why London or Toronto is going to be brilliant for him.
Look, of all of these, the country caps one, it's I think like a lot easier said than done. There are two ways to look at this, right? Country caps generally, yes, it is like the final villain, but it's like sort of a video game final villain. Like you sort of attack all these like mini villains on the way to get to this final boss. That's sort of how we've always treated country caps to be, and there are like lots of mini obstacles in there. But if you were on the other side, if you were on the U.S. government side, you have to now figure out what that policy is. Like, sure, like we would like country caps to go away. We would like more skilled immigrants from India to show up or whichever country to show up and get the access to green cards faster. But if you were on the US government side of things, what now replaces it? Like, what do you
Nothing.
do?
I mean, no. So I actually don't think it's about getting more people from India, right? Country caps just makes no intellectual sense because you're trying to say we want to get the best in some way, right?
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you have this constraint, which is we are going to equalize by the country they were born in.
Born in.
Which
Yeah.
makes you like, what are you optimizing for? Like, because first of all, every country in the world has very different set of people.
Yeah.
So is it that you want the exact same number of people from say India versus say Switzerland, which has probably a minuscule population of India? Is that what you're optimizing for? You're just optimizing for the best, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if you were say the leadership team at Google or Meta, and you said, "Oh, by the way, we want to hire the equal number of engineers to push the state of the art of AI from every country." It just makes no logical sense. So the answer to the government is it just does nothing. You just strike
Get
it out,
rid of it.
get rid of it, and you build an algorithm. And that algorithm or process could be what Vivek talks about, which is how do we get people who add to the civic and moral character of this
In
country?
addition to the academic and
Yes.
other achievements.
And it could be about how do we get the best and brightest who help shore up our national security
Right.
aims and goals against China and our villains. It could be something totally different, right?
Yeah.
But I think the current ways are not working.
Yeah.
And we have a unique opportunity now. And I don't know, I'm trying to get together some people to do something about this. But this is, I expect to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, look, Elon's an immigrant. There are like lots of immigrants now at the government level. So I'm super optimistic that some positive change will finally happen. If you're truly thinking about this as like first principles, right? Then and looking at it as like budgeting from like zero side of things, from a zero baseline. What does it look like for skilled immigration, right? Like, why not start from fair to do immigration all over again? Here are the things that make sense, here are the things that don't, and start to like not fall back or not say let's remove this. It's like, no, we have to start from like a place of nothing exists before. How do we start from now? First principles. I'm very excited to see what comes out of that.
Yep. How are other countries going to react to this, or how are other countries going to react?
And today I was talking to somebody from India. This sort of like lived in India, has like done really well for themselves on the finance side of things, and I talked to him and he was really bullish, and I was like, "What's making you really optimistic?" And he was like, "Well, one, Trump's been president before for the U.S." And during that time had very good relationship with the Indian government, and Modi and Trump get along, and both sides, they understand the value of doing business together, the value of allyship, and being able to do that. And I was like, what do you think would have happened if Trump had not won? Like, yeah, that's very unclear because it just wasn't really clear what the policies were going to look like. And so I obviously have not talked to that many people from other governments as such, but from just like talking to a few folks here and there, just this sort of similar cautiously optimistic, because one, Trump's government seems very focused on building ties, building relationships with other governments, things like let's stop like fighting with each other, let's figure out how to do business with each other, let's promote entrepreneurship, let's promote trade. From that standpoint, and we don't know what the follow-through is going to look like, but from just what's been said before and what's happened before when Trump was president, there is just people being like just excited about the prospects of working together.
By the way, first of all, I don't think cautiously optimistic is a real thing. I think people are either really excited or really hated, and there's nothing in between.
Cautiously optimistic is what do you mean? Like cautiously optimistic is very much a thing. It's like we'll wait and see. Our entire Indian ethos is about like no, we are all about cautiously optimistic. This is what we do. We do not take bets until we know it is going to be an absolute win. We are all in this principle, in this thing of like, who knows what's going to happen? Things might go to shit any minute, and you don't want to be the last person standing. Hey, this is our life and this is our upbringing. You cannot say cautiously optimistic is not a thing.
That is true. That is very much the South Indian middle class vibe. I think in Europe it's been interesting. I would say two things. One is, on one hand, it might seem like Trump's views are maybe negative for a lot of directions for Europe. In a lot of ways, we can kind of parse this into defense spending or et cetera. But I do think if we go back a couple of months, there was this report from former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, which basically said that Europe needs to regulate less and build more.
Right.
And I think that was done for a reason. That was done to basically have a way to point out that a lot of people in the EU and Europe already believed, but maybe we're afraid to talk about.
Yeah.
And which is a sense of Europe is declining and decelerating, and it needs to build as opposed to be a leader in regulation, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And I've talked to some very, very interesting people.
Yeah.
Who are secretly very happy about Trump winning. And here's why. Because now they have air cover to do things like, let's be more optimistic about, say, energy policy or building things. And they can now use the air cover of, hey, with this aligns with where the US is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the past, they could not do that and they would get smacked down and they would be exposed politically or reputationally. Now they're like, oh, no, this is what we have to do to align with the US. So I think that a lot of people in the EU, in the UK, who are secretly happy about Trump winning, even if they don't agree with his politics or the party, because they're like, I can now go say, hey, we need to do this.
Yeah.
Not because I think so, it's what the US is going to do. We need to align with them.
Yeah, it's all EAC now. And less regulation. I mean, I've never really understood being a leader in regulation. And, on Twitter...
It means asking people to accept cookies anytime they travel.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's a crazy thing to me. It's just like, go build stuff, go ship things, go make things happen. There is no pride in sort of being what's the word for it? The hall monitor, right? To just like watch out for what people are doing wrong and then like rap them on the knuckles. There is no glory in that. You got to go build things. I mean, we've been here in the UK for a year plus now. And the thing that I look at is the talent pool is incredible, right? Like when you look at UK, you look at EU, amazing universities, amazing top-notch talent from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, like you're looking all around. And then you look at like, why aren't there all of these amazing talented people starting companies? This should be better than Silicon Valley. You have this like small city, small pool of like population all concentrated in this like, small real estate. We should be doing a ton more things here. And why isn't that happening? And part of it is like culture and risk aversion. You get that. Like, India had that for many, many years. Like it's very easy to say jump off a cliff and start a company, but it takes a lot to be able to do that. But a big part of it is like, this psyche around regulations and about like, we want to be the leaders in telling people what to do or safeguarding or protecting or, that makes no sense to me. It's like you're going to have to find founders, get them to go build things.
Yep.
And that's really where the value for not just this local economy, but for the country is going to come from.
There's a great tweet thread, expose thread by Levels.io. If you folks don't know, you should follow him. He's this great indie builder. One of the most productive people you would see.
Who's in Portugal now.
He's nomadic.
Yeah.
Right?
He's in Portugal now.
So he, interestingly, and I think shout out to Patrick Collison, who I think did it, got connected to Mario Draghi when he was putting together his report. And he then shared on X his recommendations. And the recommendations, if you look at them, make so much sense. So, for example, one of the recommendations was make it possible to start a company purely online. You go to a website, think of it as like eucompany.com, and you submit whatever you need and you have a company ready to go. No physical paperwork, nothing, right? Same with bank accounts, same with all these things. And you had a lot of just great ideas, which are all along the lens of cutting out the paperwork, cutting out regulation for just getting entrepreneurship going. And I think there's a lot of lessons there for the EU. Hopefully, if they do something.
It's very close to that for the US now. Like even when I started companies 10 years ago, you could more or less start a company online, right? Like there's like some paperwork you have to mail here and there, but for the most part, it's all like ready to go. And there's so much value in doing that. And just getting people, like building a company, starting a company is already super high friction. I think Paul Graham says this, right? Like the default course of a startup is death. And so for you to be able to like start things, you have to make it as low friction as possible. So the governments, the ecosystems that enable people to go do that are the ones that eventually win.
Yep. Yeah. Hey, it's been a fun week or so.
I know, it's been a super fun week. It's been 10 days or so. I think we covered a lot here. I think one of the things that we were really keen on was skilled immigration, and I'm really glad we spent a bunch of time on it. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yes,
there.
we are in the land of DOGE, and
yeah. One final thing I wanted to talk about is, I think Sriram, you put up this poll on IG, and you talked about like who voted for whom.
Yeah,
right.
Getting all
And no, I know, but again, there's one of those things that sort of like made me very introspective. Because do you want to talk about like what you put out there and what you learned?
Yes. So first of all, follow me on Instagram. I'm a Sriram K. She's Aarthi R. We post amazing, life-changing content. So the poll I put out, I think it was maybe just to my close friends, or I don't know if it was in public, but I basically said, if you had voted for Trump, like why did you vote for Trump? And what I found was there were a lot of people who I would not think fit my perception of who a Trump voter was. For example, often women, often people from the coastal cities, and they had some very, very interesting reason. For example, one of the leading reasons which came up was they really liked RFK Jr., who I think had just been announced as he's going to be the health secretary. And because they were just really,
I don't know. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think there is some big questions about the FDA and our food supply.
Yeah.
And not to just kind of keep referring to other podcasts, but Peter Thiel was just on Barry Weiss's podcast a day ago, and he talked about how science in the US, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals and drugs, has become dogma. You can't question it. And all of us have seen and debated what happened with COVID and masks and vaccines, till the end of time.
Yeah.
And Peter, had this question, which is, so we all think that, vaccines are good, great, right?
Yeah.
There is a tendency to go, vaccines and autism, is what the crazy people think, right? But his question was, if you are a researcher, right, could you even get a grant or get funding to investigate the link? Could you even ask a question? Would be shut down.
Yeah.
And his point was, science needs that spirit of inquiry and that spirit of let us go find the answer.
Contrarian
right?
thinking. Yeah.
Not contrarian, just skepticism and a sense of like, we'll go find out the truth.
Yeah.
And I think we saw this in a few times. I don't have a strong view on vaccines, but we saw this with the mask mandates. We saw this with I'm going to say all these things, which means like YouTube will never show an episode. This will be the end of like views we get. But the COVID mandates, right? Like is how we talk to our kids. Or whether the virus came from a lab, or all these things which could not even be discussed or debated in kind of the best methods of the scientific method. So I think that RFK, and look, I don't agree with everything he says, represents a breath of fresh air where, okay, let's go look at what the FDA is doing. Let's go look at our food system, and let's go look at things from scratch, right?
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of people may not like him or may not like the government, but I do think that spirit of inquiry and science is something missing from the bureaucracy today, and I'm excited to see it come out.
Yeah, I think less views on like for me for RFK Jr., but more on the food system and how corrupt it's become in the US. Right, like we see it firsthand when we moved here for a year. Could see just like what we would eat there versus what we would eat here, and every time we had like people come in from the US and visit here, you would all talk about like delta and differences there. So there's really something going on there. We just don't know what's
Yeah.
affecting us. So yeah,
There's something
okay.
else about RFK I want to point out, which is that uh look, the guy has led a complicated life, right? Like, and he's a Kennedy, and he's led many lifetime, but he's what, mid 70s.
Yeah.
He's fit, right? Like, and he lives an active lifestyle. And tying this back, I was talking to somebody about on the online podcast social media space, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about why is it that there are so few podcasts which are on the left, which have themes of physical fitness, which have themes of like nutrition. I would say it's probably safe to say that the average YouTuber you wind up following, who talks about gains.
Is that really true?
Oh yes,
I don't know about that. I don't
But
know about
ultimately,
that.
it's maybe the people I follow.
I mean, there are tons and tons of podcasts. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's very sort of a small subsect of this. There are lots and lots of podcasts that talk about nutrition, fitness. Yeah, and I don't know if it's would you say Huberman is like right versus left?
Well, I don't think he's talked about his politics, so I don't know.
But I feel like that's sort of this very self-selecting set of things. Like you just, the sample set seems very like you take these and then you say because of this, it's all right-leaning kind of thing.
Fair enough.
Like
I got fact-checked on our own show.
You see so many like
Fact-checking still a thing?
it is here. But going back to it, I think to me the interesting thing about your IG poll was how a lot of people said they actually voted for Trump or voted for the right, but were too afraid or ashamed to say it out loud. And they gave different reasons. One was like food, nutrition side of things. There are like other reasons there. But to me, it sort of like signals this point, and this is back to our point of like Dems having to have this sort of like deep introspection on you want to be able to talk about who you're voting for and what is going on there. Like the fact that we are now at this point where you say something, you do something else, and this is also why Polymarket's doing really well or was able to predict a win there versus like exit polls, right? Because exit polls were like not reliable at all. Just tells you that there is this whole rift happening, this faction, and it's been happening for a few years, but you could really see that this is now at the very peak of it.
Yeah. The one person who never told me who she was voting for? My mom. True story. Right? Like, mom who passed away, through her entire life,
You should not. I don't know why people have to tell
she would tell us everything. But every time, and she would vote in, obviously...
You owe it to nobody. I mean,
the Indian
whoever's
elections.
watching this, you owe it to nobody to tell people who you vote
She would go, there's a very Indian reference, you go to the Indian elections, the local and the national ones, and, in India, you would get this, like, this ink blot on your finger when you vote. And she would come home, and I'd be like a kid, and, she would tell us everything, but I'd be like, who do you vote for? She'd be like, no, I'm not going to tell you anybody. And I have no idea. I never knew who she voted for. She kept it always secret. So
your fundamental right.
Yeah, there you go.
It's your right and duty.
But on that note, look, I think this episode is probably going to annoy a lot of people, but hopefully it's going to spark a lot of discussion. I do think one thing I'm looking for is just more honest discussion about what people really feel and what they really think. And I do think this is a moment in time to go have that.
Yes, tell us what you think, what you disagree with. What are the things that you think we should be covering? DOGE is not like a one-time thing. There's going to be more and more and more covered there. So tell us what's interesting to you. And I'm sure we're going to do other episodes on this.
Yeah, it's going to be a DOGE time. Sorry, that didn't work. Anyway, till next time. See ya. Thanks. Bye.